Victory in battle often goes to the side that best masters the environment. Here the victory definitely went to the Norse seamen, who certainly mastered the tide and won this part of the battle. They landed at Scarborough. Leaving their boats, they moved along the coast, rampaging as they went, while the boats headed down to the mouth of the Humber. In the Humber, they would be able to beach their boats, but they would begin to experience the exceptional tides that flow along that river. Instead of the roughly 6 hours ebbing, 6 hours flowing, because of the shape and orientation of the mouth of the Humber, what we get is an 8-hour ebb and a 4-hour very fast flow. This gives rise to a tidal bore. The first stage of their victory was the journey they made to Riccall along the Ouse. Gently easing their boats off the sandbanks, they could have been into the main flow, which would have carried them along at perhaps 8 knots. There were some risks in this adventure. They would have had to have secured the banks, and also only one tide could be achieved during daylight, so perhaps some of them had to take the risk of moving up the river during the night time. But there was a wonderful place at Riccall where they were able to leave this very fast flow and find a safe place to beach their boats. The sagas tell us that the following morning they left their boats and marched the 3 hours to get to Fulford. At Fulford they would have been stopped at the beck because not only was it full of water because of this very high tide, but also lining the northern bank was the Northumbrian army led by Earl Morcar. This allowed them time to assemble their armies free from harassment. The next phase of their exploitation of the tide came when the water began to ebb. At that point, because of the shape of the landscape, it was the Vikings who were able to get themselves across, and again we hear the sagas telling us that Harald Hardrada kept his best troops beside the river, where they would have been out of sight, completely hidden from view to the English troops, and as the tide fell, they would have been able to get themselves across the beck before the English were able to respond. This allowed them to work their way up to the fording place and surround Morcar, who at that stage the sagas say was advancing bravely, i.e. the English were winning the battle at that stage, but had managed not been able to stop the Vikings getting across the Germany beck. The final note to make on the tide is somewhat speculative, but the sagas do talk of the Norsemen being able to walk dry-shod to York because the bodies were piled up like cobblestone stepping stones across the ford, and indeed the next in-rushing tide would have had precisely this effect of forcing the bodies killed in the ford, forcing them along and up Germany beck. And it is perhaps coincidence that this is where a large number of the recycling sites that we think we've identified were found. But the high tides that we know followed a couple of days following the battle would have helped to bury these sites, leaving them for us to discover. So the tides provide us with another very strong strand of evidence leading us to be confident that Germany beck was the location of this important battle, the first battle of 1066.